Welcome back to another episode of Just
Just
a
a
Squirrel
squirrel
Looking
looking
for a
for a
Nut,
nut,
trying
trying
to
to
get
get
out of
out of
this
this
rut.
rut.
Pretty
Yo,
good progress, right?
I'm progress. Now, let's devolve a little bit. But before we do that, why don't we see if there is anyone who wants to slide down the slippery slope, the descent into oblivion with us? Is
Yes.
there anyone else in the house tonight?
There are a couple people in here.
Well, we have with us some very special guests tonight. We have Chris Sykes and Brian Goldsack, who are the co-hosts of one of the top new podcasts in the country right now, the Success Fundamentals Show. It is a thrill to have y'all here. Welcome to Just a Squirrel.
Thanks for having us, Scott.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
We'll-
I don't-
Oh, go
I
ahead.
don't even get introductions like that for my podcast. So,
Well,
wow.
don't worry. I'll make sure that the next time you're interviewed for my own podcast, you get a shimmering introduction, my brother. And I've got to say, welcome to Bernard and to Melody. It is good to have y'all on the show with us. Make sure you give us lots of comments. We want to know what you're thinking. We want you to challenge us. We want you to ask questions. And we want you to just be yourselves. Now, I'm going to tell y'all a little story. Once upon a time, outside of the Greek city of Thebes, there was a sphinx. She had the claws of a lion, the head of a beautiful woman, the body of a large cat. And in order to get into the city of Thebes, she'd ask you riddles. And the riddle was something like, what has 2 legs and 3 legs and 4 legs and is all one being at the same time? I don't remember the exact riddle. Don't expect me to remember everything. People don't know who you think I am. In any event, if you didn't answer the riddle correctly, she attacked you. So Thebes had this issue with no one going into it. It's called food, starvation, death, misery. And finally, there was someone who was able to come and give that answer. It was the hero Oedipus, and he described that being as a human being. As a child, he crawled on 4 legs. As an adult, on 2, and as an old man using a cane, he used 3 legs. And the Sphinx was so upset about it, she killed herself. Good riddance, if you ask me. Now, that story was about progress. The progress was both good, the progress from being a 4-legged being to a full scale in the prime adult, to being to progress into the 3-legged declining human being. But ever since that time, I think we've gotten this obsession with progress being only positive. We got new social media platforms. I better not be saying, maybe I'll use a different example. Driverless cars are popping out of the woodwork tomorrow. Yay, yay, that's progress. We have new voice systems in our house that can hear everything that we're saying. Yay, yay, that's progress. We have space tourism beginning. Yay, yay, that's progress. Progress is viewed as positive. But I wonder sometimes, A, whether progress is always positive, but more fundamentally, and going to the question here, what does progress even mean? Is progress defined by the fact that it's positive? Is it really progress if you're progressing downward, or is that a descent? And is descent or regression always such a bad thing? I like to regress sometimes. On Thanksgiving, my favorite thing to do for years was to go to the toy store and go on a Ferris wheel and look at the Lego Tyrannosaurus Rex. Was I wrong for wanting to regress? Was I fighting progress? Should I have been trying to be more future? Somebody answer me. Move the show forward. Show some progress. Oleg, Brian, somebody. Oleg, talk.
I think one of the things that stands out to me is I am the type of person who likes to be productive at every given moment of the day. And I find that to be a blessing and a curse at the same time. And what I mean by blessing is that it allows me to move through the day to day and accomplish many of these goals and aspirations that I achieve for. The curse is that I don't know this thing called chill mode. I don't know how to do it. I know that one of the things that actually one of my friends had labeled me as recently is that I have an extreme personality. And I'm not the type of person who, for example, if we say we're going to go on a hike, to me, a 2 or 3 mile hike is just not sufficient. I would much rather go and try and hike the Grand Canyon in a day, or to do the Camino, 400-mile hike in 3 weeks or whatever the time frame.
2 days.
So yeah, exactly. So that's one of the things that I've recently learned throughout my own life, is that there is importance in being able to take a step back and literally rest, because I have found that it's actually during that rest I can still be making progress towards some of these things, but yet in certain parts of society, such as, I don't want to generalize, but in the parts of the U.S. that I've lived in, that is not a commonly accepted form. The commonly accepted form of progress is to be able to move forward, to do more in order to be more. It's very rarely the other way around, where choosing to live. I mean, think about it this way, going back to a little bit of Scott's analogy as well. Work for a living. Think about that for a second. You have to work to live. If you don't work, you can't live the life that you want. Therefore, you can't progress with the same exact society and the standards that have been established. For me, when I first heard that statement and I really started to think about it, it's kind of crazy to me that that's the concept, that you can't just live, you can't just be, you can't just exist. You have to progress in some way or form in order to be able to fit into the mold of what society presents. So I think for me, it happens at the same time. I think there's a lot of beauty in progress. I think there are many things that I've learned by living in the U.S. I think it's beautiful to have a work ethic, but at the same time, I've also noticed myself being led down rabbit holes or paths that I may not have wanted to. There are so many times that I know I just felt frustrated for certain goals not being able to come to fruition because I was so attached to the outcome. As Lachelle Atkins would say, I was married to that outcome. I would look at a goal and I would look at myself and I would do all the work that I thought was feasibly possible. And then I would ask myself, why is this not happening? Why have I not found this? Why have I not connected to an agent? Why have I not done this? So I think there's a danger with that too, because that road led me down negative self-talk, negative self-image, and just a negative lens on life in period. When things didn't manifest at my pace due to the progress that I was making, I felt that I wasn't making any progress at all. So what is that line? Where
So
does that even stand?
it's funny you say that, because I think progression, I think everyone on this call looks at progression through a US lens. Brian and I just had a conversation with the guy who came from France. So at the time he said it was a socialist area, and his words were, why leave, well, his family's words were, why leave something comfortable to go out and chase something and be bigger than what you are, right? So I
They
think
said that.
yeah, that's what he told us.
He was giving up so much support in his country to go to a nation that didn't provide the same support.
Exactly. So then I think progression, we do look at it through a US lens, because in America, if you're not progressing, you're seeing that as a failure. Then also too, in America, with this digital era, you feel like you're doing all this work and not getting the same recognition for it as somebody else. So then you get caught in the comparison trap. So I think that's one of the things. I think progression is great, but I think of it in two ways. Like for myself, I see myself being a certain person through progression. But then Brian and I had this conversation this week. But what's that end goal like? So for example, if I get to the place where I'm trying to attain, or what I'm trying to achieve, am I going to turn my progression brain off? Right? Because once you're there, you have to sustain that level of productivity to stay on top. And if you don't continue to hone your skills, like for me as a business person, then you start losing those skills, and then you start to regress. Right? So I think that the only way that you can continue, not only way, but in my opinion, to continue to progress the way you want to, you have to focus on yourself and know that you're doing what you need to do to hit that goal. And don't compare yourself to anybody, because that's where you can feel like I had this happen to me Tuesday. I felt overwhelmed. I had like this knot in my stomach, and I was like, I felt like I wasn't doing enough to progress Brian and I show success fundamentals. Like I'm not doing enough to for people can so people can see what we're doing, right? And then I just get this knot in my stomach, and then sometimes when I get that knot in my stomach, I just sit down. But then I realize I had to like go through my checkpoints. Like, are you doing everything you can do to progress it, and then to progress the show? And if you are, then you're okay. And it's going to happen when it's going to happen. It's not going to happen on your timetable.
Yeah.
So that's how I look at it.
Two things, though, that I have to say about this. First of all, one of the things that you are mentioning is this whole idea of regression and doing everything that you can and staying on, continuing to check all of the boxes, putting in your best effort. So I find it interesting to explore and perhaps talk about what is and how do we know when we're doing our very best and all that we can in order to actually be making what would be by any account progress. Number one. The number two, Melody says sometimes people and companies assume that change itself is progress, and that's not always true. And so how do we know, and Melody, I'd very much love to hear your thoughts about this. How do we know if change that we are making is necessarily tied to progress or not? Even if, as you said, sometimes things happen in their own time and not necessarily in a way, place, or by means that we necessarily observe as progress.
So on that note, it's a very interesting point. I would say that progress, you might be progressing forward and not necessarily know if you're progressing forward in a good way until you make the attempt to progress forward. So you might think that something's a good idea, do it, find out that it wasn't a good idea. And therefore you said, hey, through this progression forward, I now realize that this wasn't a good idea. Now I'm going to progress in a different direction. Whereas if you stayed stagnant and said, I don't know if I want to progress at all, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to even make that mistake in the first place. So the process of progression, you have to be somewhat accepting of the fact that there might be shortcomings. You might be progressing towards an end that is not even necessarily worth progressing towards. But even that is learning. Even that is progress. The show that we just did, the gentleman described progress as being like, or he said, life is like a treadmill. It's just going and going and going. And you can jump on that treadmill and run along with life, or you can get off the treadmill and look at it. But even if you get off of it, it keeps going. It keeps going. So it's really your decision whether or not you want to move forward with the world or stay stagnant and watch the world move forward without you.
How do you know if you ever reach your best self? And Chris, I know you started to touch upon this subject. And the only reason why I ask that is because in knowing that more can always be done, in knowing that every single method and every single version of oneself can always be improved upon, how do you actually know that you have reached your best self in that given moment?
I think in that question, so me, I've been on this quote unquote success journey for a very long time. And my idea of success has progressed over time, because growing up, right now, my ideal situation right now, where I live, how I'm living, the job I have, if I would look back in the past, the past Chris would consider Chris today very successful in his eyes, because back then, as long as I could stay in a place that had, water, lights, and food, I'm okay, right? But that's one point. Then you get in a different environment. It was like, you know what? I may want to become this person now. And I think the only way that you know that you're at that person is if you set out on goals and then actually take the time to reflect and see where you are. because a lot of times when you go on this journey of progression, there's a lot of things that a lot of sayings out there that I didn't like, and that I come not to like, because I don't think it's sustainable. So for example, when you hear people say, you got to hustle 24 hours a day, team no sleep, blah 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 blah, and I'm like, that's absolutely crazy. You will literally burn yourself out if you do all of. I'm not saying not work hard. That's what I'm not saying. But it's what's the same. But when there's sleep, I'm working, and then when they get tired, I don't. The human body itself needs to sleep to rejuvenate, so you can put forth your best effort the very next day. So
Do
the
you
point,
even
right?
believe half of these people when they say that? By the way, because half
I
the time I
don't.
think they're lying.
100%. I don't. Like, period. I don't. So my thing is, the only way that you can know that you're doing well and you've had progression is literally if you take time, Oleg, and say, you know what? Let me just pause for a second, take some time to myself to reflect, just to rejuvenate my mind. Look where I am. Look what I've accomplished. And it's okay to pat yourself on the back, knowing that you have, another goal to achieve. But it's okay to stop in the moment and say, I've actually done well up until this point.
One thing I would say is I used to think to myself, if I write down my goals and then go after the goals, achieve the goals, I'm going to feel this really great sense of accomplishment. Because I suffered from the same thing. I'm like, how the hell do you actually know when you get there? So I was like, well, let me put an end point so then when I get there, then I could do a little dance and be happy. Did it, got to the end point, and I was like, all right, I'm here. And I wasn't as happy as I thought I would be.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
because there's always the next goal.
It's always something else. Yeah.
And to your point before, Oleg, you brought up an interesting point where you said, can't I just, why does it have to be work? Why can't I just exist? I think that we might need to come to grips with the fact that we will be in some perpetual state of work in order to exist. And I think the sooner that we can come to grips with that, the happier we'll be. And if we can make a mental construct that is perhaps joyful about that truth, we'll have a healthier construct. Because even it's just truth. Like, you have to, there's no species on this planet that does not have to put forth some effort for its survival in some capacity. We are not free of that. So rather than feel disdain towards that truth, I try to develop a philosophy that embraces it and tries to, master work.
You're raising a very interesting point, Brian. And it actually goes as to Melody's 736 comment as well. Melody, thank you very much, as always, for providing well thought out and comprehensive contributions that in the comments. You enhance the show so much, and we wouldn't be the same without you. And what she's talking about is really on a cultural level and on a social level, even on a planet-wide level, what you're talking about, Brian, which is to what extent is evolution technological or cultural or whatever actually progress, and whether it is something that we need to truly aspire for. I am reading a book now about the mass extinctions that have happened throughout the history of our planet. And one of the things that some of these extinctions I really didn't know about, like the ones that killed off the dinosaurs. Of course, everyone knows about that asteroid, and it's so dramatic and cinematic and everything. But some of the other ones were a little bit more subtle. So, for instance, I did not know that in this era of Earth's life called the Ediacaran era, before any of the animals that were the common ancestors of what now we consider animal life, there were entire species or entire groups of creatures that inhabited the oceans that weren't plants and they were not animals. And these were the victims of the first mass extinction. They couldn't handle all the oxygen. They had progressed so that they could more and more successfully conquer their environment. They could be more and more tightly adapted to it. They didn't move, but they had complex cellular structures, and they fed off of the primitive sort of pond scum bacteria that was covering the earth at the time, just for people who might be curious about what these non-animal, non-plant creatures really were. And they made progress, but that progress specialized them to such an extent that as the carbon and oxygen balance in the Earth's ecosystem changed, they were wiped out. And so, what Melody and what you're talking about, Brian, is on the one hand, the need for us to some extent to be adaptable and to progress in order to stay vibrant as a species or as a culture. On the other hand, what may seem like progress, going to your point earlier, Chris, in the moment could actually be the end game.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that the other two mass extinctions that you didn't choose to mention, Scott, were public speakers and podcast hosts, because that was going to get me concerned.
Yeah, well, when the pandemic happened, that public speaker part looked like it might be an extinction event, but fortunately it wasn't, especially for you.
But you know what? One of the things that was kind of brought to my attention is, I think, Brian, you were sharing the things that you said, is I'm really curious. Well, two things, and maybe any of you can shed some light on this, but when did this concept even evolve as far as the fact that we had to work in order to exist? Do any of you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, at least within...
Was it always like this?
I know. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, even things go all the way back to just us as a species. I mean, if we were Homo sapiens walking around on the continent of Africa and we were hungry and we were thirsty and we needed shelter, we needed to go kill something or gather something or prop up a whole bunch of sticks and make a hut. That's all work. It's all work. It required work. The nature of the work has become increasingly more sophisticated, and arguably the nature of the work has become increasingly easier. I mean, I don't have to kill like a boar with a stick in order to eat. Like,
hopefully not.
I did that just yesterday.
Well, Scott, he does it for fun though, But I mean, at this point, we can do a podcast or sell some cars, and you can get all the boar you want at the supermarket, right? So, but there's still that work, that underlying component of work. And I think that the progression of humanity is basically a progression towards, is there any way that we can perhaps make this work a bit easier? But it's always going to be there. It's always going to be there.
If I'm being honest, I think if you're looking at the living to work thing, again, this, I don't know if you all will agree with me on this or not, but everything to me, from a progression standpoint, has some type of monetary gain in it. Because in terms of like, okay, if you look at business in and of itself, the person who look at Henry Ford and the Ford Company, look at Carnegie, right? All of these people now this again, they're looking from a business lens. Any type of progression led to massive wealth, right? So I wonder, is that because we know, like Brian said, regardless of what you do, whether you're the most laziest person on earth or you're trying to be the most successful person in whatever you do, you have to produce to make a living. So I think if the concept of currency, the exchange of money to buy goods and services is relevant on a global standpoint, you're always going to have to work in order to live. Now, you could take that and I think that's where entrepreneurship comes from, is because, again, nobody does anything that tries to do that for free. Like, I'm pretty sure Jeff Bezos didn't make Amazon just to be nice, right? It was some monetary. Yes, did he provide value to people? Of course, but he got massively rich doing it, right? So I think as long as we live in a society or a global society of an exchange of something to get something, we're always going to be in this state, to be honest.
Melody, though, if I could, Melody might disagree. I mean, she's saying for her progress is enriching who she is with balance. I mean, what would you say to that, Chris?
Balance in what way?
And what kind of enrichment?
Yeah, what kind of enrichment?
Melody, I leave you to answer that. I think that's the sort of engagement that we love to have here, and Melody will have an answer, by the way.
No, 100%. I'm pretty sure she does. And I appreciate this banter, because I think anytime you do try to get to an ideal self, Brian and I had a conversation actually we had a show on it. Actually, the mind always thinks in survive and thrive modes, right? So in order to achieve balance, you have to have some type of comfort at some point, right? Because when you say I want to have a balanced lifestyle, that means you want to have a comfortable lifestyle, and in order for you to have that, the basic needs need to be taken care of on a comfortable level, which means basically, what do you do, right? Nobody wants to look over their shoulder all the time in the place they live. Nobody wants to feel starvation. You want to have a roof over your head. You want to have certain comforts. So in order for you to do that, you had to produce to a certain point to at least experience that, and then at that point you can determine if this is where you want to be. If you want more, want to stay right here.
That's a great point. In a way, it's almost like you're saying enrichment and balance presuppose that you're already in a specific, whether financial state or lifestyle state, where you can ponder things like a more balanced life. If you're living in a desperate situation, you're worried about your life every day, you're not going to be thinking to yourself, should I take up pottery? Because I feel like that would be a beautiful expression of my emotions right now. Like, you're like, how the hell am I going to not die tomorrow? Once you're good, you're well fed, you're comfortable, you have a roof over your head, you feel like your ends are all met, then perhaps you can start to develop some of the higher functioning aspects of your mind and your artistic, creative abilities. But I thought that was a great point, Chris.
The other thing that I find interesting within what all of you just said and what Melody touched upon as well is, I think, in my opinion, with all the progress that has been made in however many years, 10 to 15 years, social media being one of those, when Facebook and all these platforms have been introduced, I have noticed myself to digress in certain situations solely because now the amount of information is so much more than it used to be. So now, in creating one post and posting it on LinkedIn, it's no longer only seen by those closest to me. It can be seen by thousands, if not millions, of other people across completely different continents, right?
100%.
So now I think the possibility of, okay, this is what I envision my life to be, this is what I strive for, can be challenged on a daily basis. So I'm 28 years old, and I would say, entering a really interesting part of my life, and that's the conversation about marriage, kids, house, golden retriever. All these things are becoming more and more frequent. And you guys are laughing. I'm sure you've been in similar shoes. Okay,
Not me.
So
I'm not old enough yet.
You'll get there one day, but. And I find that to be really interesting because with all of this quote unquote progress, with all of these, it seems like there's a new social media platform that's being built every week, if not daily.
100%.
And it's what it's doing is, as what I believe, it creates tremendous opportunities for people to connect, not only across different places, but also across different versions of themselves. The person that I was yesterday is slightly different than the person that I am today. And I'm probably going to be a different version tomorrow than the one that you're experiencing right now. So that's the beauty. I think the challenge of that is, because I'm constantly evolving and everyone else is constantly evolving, and the perspectives and the opinions that I receive in return, it makes it more challenging to pick and choose. It makes it more challenging and for me, I can only speak from my perspective, but it makes it more challenging for me to answer the question of Melody's comment. What does it mean to be enriching? What is balance? With billions of perspectives that are shared around that topic, what does it actually even mean to have balance? And more importantly, how do I answer that question on my own terms without having to be influenced by however many opinions that I choose to be exposed to in regard to my life?
By the
Mm.
way, that whole series of comments, and well, tying into Melody's last remark, or the second to the last remark that you just put up there a second ago, goes as to, by the way, another question related to progress that I'd love to throw out there. I might be crazy, but y'all, I hate balance. At least for me, I don't want a balanced life.
Just thinking that, Scott.
I
Just thinking.
yeah, I love
that?
have. What'd you say?
I mean, do you really want balance? Like, you want to just like wake up and everything is like status quo, and you eat toast and drink milk, and then you go and there's no controversy. You eat, like, you know,
Exactly.
right.
Exactly. Yeah, you busted me. But really, what I love, for instance, someone like me who loves to work, who has this very extreme drive. The idea, I hear things about work-life balance and balance. I had a business partner, Scott. Life isn't balanced enough. You need to meditate more so you can have. I didn't want that. I like to meditate. It's okay, but I didn't want to meditate. I wanted to have. I like being extreme. I like having this huge drive. I like working all the time. I like my life being over the top and living at the edge. All the Greek heroes that I talk about all the time, they were extreme. That's one of the things that made them heroes. And so, am I actually regressing in life by refusing to move to balance, Oleg?
Well, my question to you is, do you really want to meditate or not?
Goes back.
Well,
Bye.
no, Scott, I actually have a question for you. You said you have this extreme drive, right?
Yes.
So what is the end goal for you? If there is an end goal, because okay, so you're driving towards something. You say you have this extreme drive, and when you drive, there's a destination. So when you're driving somewhere, and not driving somewhere, when you're on this quest to become the highest sense of self in Scott, what do you like? What do you envision yourself to be? Like, what is it?
It's conceptual. I view myself as radiating maximally in this world my essence, where I am pushing out everything inside that I've got to offer to the point that to go any further would diminish what I'm capable of pushing out. That absolute max. Just as the sun rises to the top, and that's when it's at its brightest, that's what I'm looking to do.
How do you know that, though? How do you know that you're choosing to, that is the progress that you're choosing and not someone else's progress that you're choosing to live?
Because I've never met anyone that actually says, I mean, maybe you and I have said this privately, Oleg. I don't know. I don't remember. You tell me whether we've said it privately. I'll just pretend we didn't. Which is that most people, I do feel in all fairness, if they talk about this stuff, talk about it in two ways. Either they talk about it in Melody's way, which I don't want to diminish her choices for herself, because that's what I like about Melody. And there are so many people that are stuck in miserable lives because they want what Melody is really set as her goal for her life, but they haven't been able to do that for whatever reason, or else they're nuts. Who are like these hard driving monsters that you work for that, go to the office parking lot at 4 a.m. and then make sure everyone's car is there and tap to see whether the hood is still warm, because that would show that they just parked there a few seconds ago. And if you've left earlier than them at 2 o'clock in the morning after being there since 4 in the morning, they call you lazy. I mean, there are people like that, and that's not really also what I'm about. And I know that there are other people like they're out there in the world, but I feel like, in terms of how I know that I'm doing that, every time I feel like I'm pushing myself into a new, different direction, and that I'm more engaged, more sort of full of what I call the providential river channeling through me, then I know that from my perspective, I am still progressing.
So,
I mean, not to interrupt you, Chris, but I mean, if you're thinking like music, right? If you think of art, there's genres of music like progressive rock, progressive jazz, modern art, right? And when you're like, what the hell does that even mean, progressive jazz? And then you listen to it, and it's like far out on the fringes, experimental, try new things. Some of it's good, some of it's not good, but then from the progressive rock and the progressive jazz, you'll eventually see that the rest of music catches up to what they were doing, usually about 10 years later. A lot of it is terrible, though. Some of it sticks, right? Like, well, I'm not like a music guy, so I'm afraid to give any examples. But I listen to it, right? So there is a chance that a progressive mentality is just a disposition in life where you're like, I personally want to be experimenting with a whole variety of different things. I'm willing to fail at a lot of these and look foolish at a lot of these ventures that I go into. But maybe some of them will stick, and I'm going to be a leader that brings the rest of my friends, family, community in the direction, because I was brave enough to go there.
Okay, so Brian, to that note too, right? Because I'm actually very curious on what Scott's going to say about this. A lot of those people who does that, you don't realize that they're geniuses until they're gone, right? Yeah. So if you're living out on the fringes all the time, you may not be appreciated the way you may want to be appreciated while you're here on Earth. And then when it takes, like you said, 10, 15 years for somebody's like, oh my God, Oleg was this genius and he was living amongst his people who didn't understand what he was doing. But now everything is like that. So my question to you, Scott.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
But to Scott's point, he said he wants his aura to shine on Earth. So I think a lot of people look at life of what you can get from life, when you should be looking at life of what are you giving to people, or have you emptied yourself here, right? But sometimes when you empty yourself here, you're not really appreciated like you should be appreciated until you're gone. So Scott, my question to you is, if you continue to do what you're doing, and let's just say you are you're in that progressive category, but nobody realizes that you were a genius until 5-10 years later, would you feel that you have failed on your journey to have your aura shine on Earth?
Wow, what a great question.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
That's the ultimate existence here in a nutshell, Scott Mason. So
yeah, and
no pressure.
Well, no, and it goes as to something. I'm so glad that Melody in particular is in the audience today, because that's something that she's raised and that has actually been discussed on my own podcast. And that is goes to the extent to which we believe that our lives are temporal. I mean, there is this whole body of thinking that's emerging. Some of it is religious thinking, historical religions, where we've been taught perhaps that there's an afterlife and your spirit lives on, and you can perhaps appreciate everything that you've contributed through immortality. Or if you believe that there's this large consciousness in the universe that separates itself out into pieces and incarnates and then goes back, and that consciousness rejoins the larger collective, or it maintains some separateness as a spirit, but still gets to ultimately see whatever that they've done out in the world actualized. Perhaps they may even benefit from it in another life. That's
I
one
just summed
way.
up like every religion in like 8 seconds.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm glad I was able to get something out in a brief manner. And so, but in any event, right? Like if all of that were true, yeah, okay. I don't mind if I'm acclaimed later, because at least some element of my consciousness would get to appreciate that. But there's another part, and a lot of people, including me, during the majority of my adult life until not all that distant past, believe that we were just dust when it was all over. And that, I will say, Chris, I probably would view myself as a failure with that mentality if I were only to be remembered or recognized or receive any sort of appreciation for what I'd done after I was dead, because that was the ultimate challenge. One frustrating thing about my large organizational life, and please forgive me, folks, I hope this doesn't sound conceited when I say what I'm about to say, but it is something that was a pattern, was I would be leading these groups, a unit or a division. And people would be like, oh, it's nothing. He's not that bright. Oh, we can replace him with anyone. Let's treat him like garbage. Tell him he's stupid. And he'll, who cares if he leaves anyway? He's not contributing that much anyway. So then I would leave, and all of a sudden they'd be like, oh my God, there was so much work that he was doing. Oh my God, the staff is in open rebellion because he's gone. oh my God, like all of this other, we can't find anyone, and everyone we're interviewing sucks compared to right who and what he was. To me, it was never consolation that when I would hear those stories after the fact. I never felt good about that. I wanted the appreciation now. I
Yeah.
wanted the appreciation during those jobs, not, I didn't want to hear later, oh, they realized they made a mistake when they let you walk out the door. Well, thanks. The door already shut.
Yeah, exactly. And then also too, I look at it from a genius perspective. Like if you look at the great geniuses on earth, they suffered a lot too. Like in music, like a lot of great music, a lot of people who we consider musical geniuses were troubled, right? Like for example, Prince, troubled, musical genius though. Oh my God. Right? Michael Jackson struggled, musical genius, right? So it's a lot. So that's what I'm saying too. Like if you're living on the fringes, you're considered the genius type, and you know that what you're doing means something, because it's not it's almost it's that phrase that people always use. um this person was ahead of their time, right? You know what I'm saying? Like you're ahead of your time. Like your thoughts, your how you move, how you think, how you do things, you're ahead of your time, because people don't get it today, right? They later learn to appreciate it, but they don't get it today, right? That's my fear, to be honest, because my thing is, if I'm, God willing, I'm able to live to a point to where I get to where I want to get to. I want to mentor people. I want to tell people about. I'm very authentic. I'm very, in terms of like not authentic. I'm very transparent, right? I don't want to call. I think somebody else should call me authentic. I don't think I should claim that I'm authentic, but it's just like I'm very open and transparent, because I think that a lot of people, that's what social media does. It hides mistakes. But
Yeah.
you see, the biggest communities are built around people who are very open about their mistakes. Like I've been through what you've been through. Not look how great my life is. I have this big house and these nice things, and my life is just great. I've traveled all the time. People like to see that when you fell on your face, and how did you get up from that, and and what dark places did you go through. I posted something on my Instagram. TD Jake said, he's a pastor down in Texas. He goes, sometimes being great isn't always that great. He said sometimes being great is giving yourself to everyone and then coming home and feeling empty yourself, right? So but that's the process of it. So like that's my
There,
fear.
there is a strong chance that what we're looking for is as simple as saying, I want people to appreciate me, which is a very reasonable, common human desire. And I'm going to throw this out there. I know Chris isn't going to like this. There could be some value in materialism as well. I mean, when I work really
Oh,
hard
100%.
and I'm doing great, and I go out for like a really nice steak dinner, or I can go on a vacation, in those moments, I feel very rewarded for my efforts. And I think that there might be a certain degree of anxiety people get when they admit that. They're like, I don't want to seem like materialistic. I have no issue with that. I
Me
mean, what
neither.
am I doing all this? What am I doing all this work for if it's not for me to have better things later on in my life? I mean, almost everything that we do is some form of delayed gratification. We suffer now for a better future later, and I'm okay with that. That's just always the way it is. You plant the seed in the soil for the tree it becomes later. It's just a thing in nature. It's not like a weird abstract suffering thing that society is beating us with. It's just the way it is. And I think that the more society can reflect that natural tendency, the more successful that society is.
I think you can test that materialistic. You hear that a lot too, right? Where people say I'm not materialistic, but if everyone could think about to a place where you used to simply live, and the moment you got enough money to go to the next place, you did, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? From where I'm from, I didn't want to stay there. That's just how that's just how it goes. And when I get to a point, I want to move from here. I think it's okay to want something better for yourself. But I think one of the ultimate tests of that is if you ask yourself if if somebody would just drop a boatload of cash at your door, would you keep the exact same lifestyle? Would you buy the same groceries? Would you wear the same clothes? Would you drive the same things? Would you live in the same house if money was not the issue? I think most people wouldn't stay where they are personally.
And in a way, this ties back
Well,
into the original point with progress, if I may. If I may.
mhm.
If you want progress to occur in your own life, in some way, you need progress to occur for the lives of others. If I said, I want a really, really nice house, and I'm going to make bread, not bread, the money bread. I mean, not that either, but like I'm going to make bread. I'm going to go start baking loaves of bread. People are going to say there's a lot of people already baking loaves of bread, Brian. So what is going to be different with your bread than all of the other bread that everyone else is making? But then once they say that's a good point, what if I make bread that tastes just as good as any other bread, but somehow you lose weight when you eat it because there's no carbs and it's like good for you? Ah, well that's progress, right? Because I found out some new thing with bread that nobody else found out, and now people are going to buy that. I have progressed bread because I've progressed other people's dietary whatevers, and now my life progresses because I progressed bread.
Mm.
So
I want to just interrupt if I could real quickly. I wanted to acknowledge Melody's remark, her most recent remark, because we didn't have a chance to get to that. And with the
Oh,
conversation
please,
moved on a
please.
little bit. Thank you,
Please.
Melody. As always, I love when you banter back and forth with us, and as well as the many other people who have during the course of this show. Anyway, go back to what you were saying before I so crudely, rudely, and vulgarly interrupted.
Oh, I mean, and I
No,
just looked at what Melanie said. It is a beautiful point. I mean, actually, I'm going to read that because it was such a beautiful point.
yeah, read that,
God,
please.
for me, I want balance. I want to be connected to nature, to God, those around me, and the moments that take your breath away.
Is so, Melody? I ask you, are you currently balanced?
Yeah, we'll see.
I want to.
There's
I want
always a
to. I
little bit
want
of a
to.
lag back and forth, by the way, on the
No,
comments. Just
100%.
FYI.
Because I'm curious. Because
I
it seemed like she's like she's defined it for herself. So I wonder,
Mhm.
is she does she currently live that life, or is she
Mhm.
progressing the point of the night towards that
Mhm.
life?
I'm curious, and this is a point that Brian had made that really piqued my interest. And there were a couple other points that all of you had mentioned earlier that I just want to throw out there as possible things to explore. Like one, starting with Scott's point, however many minutes by now, and that's for me. The question is, why do we have to be remembered? Why do we seek for that to begin with? And then the other
Ooh.
part is, how do you accept the fact that you may or may not be remembered? And is focusing on that question, does that take away from the present moment? And the other point that I wanted to that I thought was interesting, and Brian, you were talking about this concept of looking to do different things in life, but then also realizing that there are thousands of other people doing quote unquote same thing, when really the reality is it might be a similar version, but it's never the same exact thing. What I found through that journey, because I've been in those shoes when I was first starting the podcast, people would say, why would you start a podcast when there are hundreds of others? And
Yeah,
I
exactly.
had a hard time answering that question because I realized that yes, there are hundreds of others, but at the same time, those are 100 different versions of the same topic, hundreds of perspectives of the same topic. And what I found is that there is for me, there personally has been a danger in projecting the same information upon other people, saying, don't start a podcast because there are hundreds of others, because the reality is that there are hundreds of other versions of that. So I think there is beauty in those things, in acknowledging that there's progress being made, but then at the same time, I've also found through my own journey and just based on how I was introduced to that, there's also danger in thinking that, okay, just because there are hundreds of other podcasts on success, I mean, the two of you do a show like this, and they're probably not 100, they're probably, I don't know, millions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Millions of different versions of success, starting from Lewis Howes to Tim Ferriss to Joe Rogan to whoever else that's in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the beauty of it all for me is being able to see different versions of progress through someone else's lens. So not everyone is going to view success the same exact way. Even the four of us on this conversation right now, as well as Melody and anyone else that's tuning in, probably has a different version of it. But I think for me, that's also the beauty of being able to progress as a community. And what I mean by that is a community where one's opinion can be accepted. And going back to Brian's point, maybe it is as simple as being appreciated. Maybe that is what many people seek for, is an opportunity to be acknowledged and appreciated for who they are, and not necessarily be told that, hey, your thinking is wrong, or don't pursue this. Nobody needs to hear 105th podcast on success. So those are the things that I found really interesting within what you guys have shared. But ultimately, the question I still ponder is, why do some of us strive to be remembered? Why is now not
No,
enough?
You
Why do
know
we
what?
have to outlive our time?
You know what, Oleg? It's a couple. Well, I'm glad that you brought that. Everybody's starting a podcast comment up because I look at it in a different. That can actually deter people from even starting.
Oh
What I
yeah.
what I found out as we progress in the podcast world, a lot of people aren't consistent.
Hmm.
Meaning, it may be a ton of success podcasts out there, but where you win and stand out is your consistency throughout time. And some people aren't like that, right? That's what helped me. It's like, oh, we're starting another success podcast, and Brian and I has figured out a way that we can add more value. I'm not going to drop it on the show because it's not official yet, but we found something that can separate us in that realm. But that your 100, and your point is great too, Oleg, to the point to where, yeah, there may be 100 podcasts about a particular thing, but 100 people don't think the same, and
Hmm.
your audiences may think like them, and then that's where their community is built, and you can carve your piece out of this huge podcasting space and become, known to these group of people. But if you're trying to be like the number one podcast, I think your bet is how consistent are you going to be over time so your audience can get used to you. And most people aren't consistent in dropping things on a weekly, but they may drop something this month, 2 months later. Yeah, they have a podcast, but it's not a podcast. But to your point, from a remembrance standpoint, that is a great question because I think a lot of people are are afraid
some
to be
people,
forgotten based off of what's happened to things that happened in their lives. But go ahead, Brian.
some people definitely. I mean, I heard it once said that some people aspire towards wealth and some people aspire towards fame. Okay,
Hmm.
and each of those are kind of like big burning desires that people have in their hearts, but you usually fall into one of the two categories. For me, I'm more like a wealth type person. Like I'll take fame if it gives me wealth. Okay, some people like fame for the sake of fame. If I'm not going to get wealthy from my fame, if I'm famous because I slipped on ice and got hurt and it blows up on TikTok, that's not good for me, right? So, but to Chris's point, you said you carve out your own little world or you carve out your own little piece of an industry. So I think to myself, if you can eliminate the fame component, which is what that's the way I think, there might be like 10,000 country pancake houses scattered throughout the United States, run by some old couple that makes pancakes and they cater to all of the people in their little community. And the husband and wife make a good income and they have a nice little following that goes there and they have a nice house. They're doing okay. They sent their kids to school. Good. The fact that there's 9,999 other country pancake houses scattered throughout the U.S. really doesn't matter if
Hmm.
if your goal isn't fame per se. If it's for
Exactly.
you to do your thing, if you like making pancakes, go make pancakes. If you can make a living from making the pancakes, wonderful. And in my opinion, to a lot of people, mission accomplished. You got to uniquely express the thing that you wanted to do and you made a living doing it.
Melody's last point seems aligned with that, actually. And so I wanted to acknowledge that. I'm going to ask each of y'all, and Melody and Bernard, anyone else who is listening or watching, success is wealth or fame or something else altogether? What camp are you, Oleg? Fame, wealth. Chris, fame, wealth.
For me, I'm a wealth dude. I could care less about fame. I do not care if I have 2 followers on every social platform. I could give a damn about that. Right? I could care less. As long as, like Brian said, as long as I know that I have it, I'm cool. I don't care about it. But like you said, if I'm famous, I want to be famous for something productive or of value that allows me to be famous, which in turns to wealth. So that's how I view it.
Oleg?
I think for me, if I had to only pick between the two, it's probably wealth. And the only reason why is because I think wealth can be viewed in many different ways. I don't think it's necessarily what I have in the bank account, but it's more so the skills that I have, the things that I'm able to contribute to my life as well as the lives of others. So I think there are different definitions for that, and that's how I would answer that.
Scott, we're going to ask you. I'm not going to let you hide from that question.
Exactly.
It's actually tough. Now, I will qualify. To me, if it were going to be fame, yeah, I wouldn't want it to be fame for something embarrassing. Like I wouldn't want to be famous for I wouldn't want to be Jeffrey Epstein, who's famous for the things that he did. That'd be pretty awful.
Exactly.
But if it were positive, I probably would say fame, because it gives access, and to me it shows that thing which it gives access to wealth, and it also gives appreciation, which is an area that I feel I've not necessarily experienced as much in life. And so to have a fully balanced life, I would like it. Yolanda, welcome back. It's good to see you here. Thank you. It just makes my day. You said wealth. She's with you, Chris.
Team Chris.
Yolanda.
Plus
Love
one.
it.
You know, half the time I don't even believe the stuff I say on here. But anyway, that's why I only seek fame. Fame. I'm a fame hoe.
So would that be considered progress? Would that be considered progress if half the time you say stuff you don't believe in, or are you digressing in that moment?
If I say stuff that I don't believe in at all, and I convert everyone to that belief system, then I might actually consider that a perverse and twisted sort of progress. I would just have to figure out how I would deal with the consequences of my actions.
It's a cult leader type progress.
That's
I don't believe
right.
any of this, but they all believe it. They're all like giving me money and
Yeah, too bad I don't believe in any of it, but I'll keep saying it. Okay, give them what they want.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Do you guys?
It goes back. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
All right. So with Scott, it tied into, once again, a deep human desire for appreciation. Again, i.e., his desire for fame. I mean, I don't know how big you want to get, Scott, but if you get all the way up to the top, my friend, and you have an entire world saying, Scott, we love you. Everything you do is amazing. You are brilliant. You're talented. You're good looking. Do you think that when that happens, and there's that billboard of you up in New York City, in Times Square, are you going to be like, I did it. They finally love me as much as I wanted to be loved?
Very interesting. So I love that we are truly going into extravagant and unlikely sci-fi.
I mean,
territory.
dream big.
Right.
Don't say that, Scott. Do
I
not
wouldn't
say
even
that.
say that's sci-fi. I would say just dream big.
That's absolutely right. Maybe we'll have another episode with the 4 of us about modesty. But in any event, you know what? That to me presents the same problem as wealth, because the more stereotypical answer, and Yolanda, I have to laugh. I didn't say that. Wealth can buy you fame. That's true. It won't buy you adulation, though, if that's what you need, though, will it? Like, people aren't exactly loving Jeff Bezos, although he's got a lot of wealth. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't care. Maybe the fame itself is what he wants and doesn't. Or
there's a difference between fame and being infamous, which we just found out recently.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. But I would say So the initial gut reaction would be, no, I'd never be satisfied because love is temporal, and fame, we know there's always an arc to fame. It always ends at some point, whether you die or you just go out of vogue, you're yesterday's news. And so that is the immediate downside of that. But fame also leaves you a legacy. And so I don't know that I necessarily would want fame purely for the ego gratification. That would show a deficiency on my part that I don't like to think that is a core component of my personality. It is so that I could fully, since I view success as why I'm here, my providential message or my providential purpose fully expressing out in the world, I would like it to be magnified as greatly as possible. And in all seriousness, fame, whether even if it's after my death, would be the only way to really do that. So that's why I would prefer that. Whereas wealth allows you, wealth to me, there is some people, I don't really believe him half the time, but some people want wealth so they can give a lot philanthropically. Yet I never see them living on a single dollar bank account. I think that they like to do that with their wealth, but they want wealth for other purposes, which is maybe perhaps for comfort, but I think a lot of it is, even that is ego-driven. And ego-driven goals are, to me, they are progress oriented, but they're not necessarily what drives me. When I say fame, I really do want to clarify that it is because I view myself purely as an avatar for the cosmic or the providential waves that I am the lens for. It's not really about me. I'm just a messenger. I'm just an avatar. So if I'm able to utilize what I have within me to be the avatar for that message that's bigger than me, then that's why, to me, fame would be progress.
You know what, Scott?
It's me. That's gross.
You know what, Scott? I have a question about that too, just to see where your mind goes. I always say your dream will test you to see if you're true or false. And what I mean by that is it's a flip side to appreciation, right? It's always two sides to a coin. Meaning, if people love you, people hate you, or don't like you, or hate on you.
Which happens if you're wealthy.
100%. You're 100%. It's two sides to that coin. Some people are people do not like a person who are doing better than them because they feel like they look at success as, well, since Scott's successful, I can't. So since my mentality is like that, I don't like Scott. Right. So when I ask myself this question, it's like, yeah, it's great to become wealthy or it's great to become famous, but can you deal with what that comes with when it comes to that journey where you're seeing progression, and you have your fans here because we're all human. A lot of people say, yeah, I don't care what people think, but then you always see people commenting on the haters of what people say about them. Right. So I think, that's human. And once you get to a point where you don't care about that. So my question, Scott, is as you're progressing to become this breath of life for the earth, are you prepared for what comes with that when it comes to like, oh, I don't like that guy for whatever reason, then that community starts,
the hater community
starts to pull you down,
start making like memes about you and stuff. Sarcastic, snarky memes.
Exactly.
Are any of us ready? Oleg, you probably have something to say about this, and I'd like to turn it over to you because I'm sure you will, actually.
I don't think you can prepare for that, and I don't think there's anything you can do to prepare for fame. And the only reason why I say that is because I think it is a drastically different world than the day.
But isn't that true for wealth, Oleg?
Yeah, probably to a degree. I think there's similarities between the two, but I think in regard to the fame, at least in my opinion, yes, I can sit here and try to process how I deal with negative feedback and criticism, and I have to do that on a daily basis anyway, even in the position that I'm in right now. But I think when you, in my opinion, I think when you cross that road and when you get into that sphere, when you get into the sphere of, who's a great example? Justin Bieber. Wouldn't get into that
Mm.
space. When you get into the space where Kevin Hart, I was listening to an interview he had with Joe Rogan, I believe, and he was saying how one of the things that has really changed in his life was when Kevin Hart no longer became a name, but it became a brand. It became a business. It became a model of financial support for many people surrounding him. That's when the true change happened. And I think the same thing applies to fame and maybe elements of wealth is when it crosses that road from having to be just Scott Mason to all of a sudden now you've become an entity that actually provides a living, a source of income for people to survive and build their dreams and aspirations off of. So, long story longer, in my opinion,
So
I don't think I can. I think I can
I'm gonna,
fully prepare for what that world brings.
I'm going to ask a rhetorical question here.
Mhm.
Scott's point about whether or not wealth and fame are the same. Scott, what was the latest news that you heard about David Burritt?
David Bird?
Burritt.
Bert?
Burritt. Burritt. You know who
Nothing.
that is?
No.
Nothing, right? He's the owner of U.S. Steel. That guy controls all the steel in the United States. You have no idea who he is. I had no idea who he is until I just looked him up on my phone while we were talking. That guy is a multi-billionaire, presumably. You don't know him. I don't know him. I don't know if Oleg or Chris knew him. But
Nope.
we know Justin Bieber. We know what's going on with Daniel Craig now that the new James Bond movie is coming out and the new Bond girl, who I can't remember her name, but she's gorgeous. Regardless, we know about famous people, but we don't necessarily know what's going on in the lives of extraordinarily wealthy people. So given the two choices, I'd hover towards wealth because you can keep it kind of covert, at least your personal life. Whereas I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I think that's more so in business and entertainment. I doubt you can. There's not unless unless you go behind the business, unless you're like you running the play. I think that only happens because, like you said, David Burritt, who is the owner of the U.S. Steel, is able to go to shop right down the street because nobody knows who the hell he is.
Sorry, David.
Yeah, but
But
I don't think he cares because he can buy ShopRite, the company, right? He doesn't care.
But that's interesting because that rubs against my value system. He has all of this phenomenal wealth. That's true. But what is he conceivably doing with it? He's clearly not using it for the larger betterment of society in any charitable sense. Otherwise, he wouldn't be that wealthy.
I don't know.
But that's according to our lens.
That's our lens. But
That's
Scott,
not according to his lens.
Well,
his
but what I'm saying is that his value system, though, right, is one that's problematic. And to say I'd rather why I'm rooting for fame as the singular goal is because it's aligned with, to me, actually counterintuitively, a more altruistic value system.
But what if David Bird is changing the lives of people of causes that matter to him,
and he could be,
as opposed to like the grand public? Because, for example, I'm actually curious if for extremely wealthy people, do they have a responsibility to make everybody's life better, or if he built this steel business and says, yeah, I have $16 billion and I want to change, I like grass. So I'm gonna use my wealth to invest in grass companies that make people have better lawns. Yeah, it's not helping like hunger or malaria or things of that nature, but it's something that matters to him. Does he have a responsibility to do that?
I'll argue yes. And he's not maximizing his potential in this world by virtue of the fact that he has such massive wealth. He would not have massive wealth if he were maximizing the value of his dollars in the world, because if he did, he wouldn't be that wealthy. And so I've got I strongly believe this, and this has been covered on this podcast before, so people disagree as you see fit. But I believe we each have an ethical obligation to maximize the skills and the opportunities and the gifts that the universe has given us. And they've been given for a reason, and the ultimate test of our character and whether we are doing what the universe wants us to do is whether we're really pushing it out there to the full extent of our abilities. And not only would I argue, not knowing him personally, but I'm going to talk about the theoretical person, if he is still so wealthy that he could buy an entire town, let's say, even after his charitable donations, he could easily live more than comfortably without a few $100 million of his dollars. So he's not maximizing his potential impact in the world. He's saying the universe has given me this. I'm going to hoard this. I've got an ethical problem with that.
I got a lot to say about that, but I'll try to condense it down to some big points.
Good.
So
I'm looking for a fight.
So number one, before you make fun of David Byrne, who neither of us know, and assume simply because he is wealthy, okay, because don't forget, Scott, that classism doesn't necessarily mean that you have to speak disparagingly of people of a lower class. It is making grand assumptions about people because of their class, not necessarily because they're poor, middle class, wealthy. And there's something in the United States where we feel very comfortable speaking and making grand assumptions about wealthy people and assuming malice and stinginess without ever knowing them. It's classism, again. It's overlooked because it's only mean when you do it to poor people, but right now we're doing it to rich people, right? So regardless, to the point of whether or not he's contributing to society at large, look around your room and see if anything is made out of steel, number one. If anything in your room is made out of steel, he's contributed to your life in some way. And you should thank David for a second for the steel that's in your room. The second thing, there's a mathematical thing, and I should send it to you if I find it, where they talk about how the wealth accumulated by the extraordinarily successful pales in comparison to the wealth generated due to the efforts of the extraordinarily successful. Using steel as an example. So that man presumably makes steel. I don't know what he does with it. It's just slabs of steel. Let's pretend it is, okay? That guy goes, sells steel to a company that makes nails. So now a nail company has arisen because this man made good steel. That nail company employs additional people, gives them 401k plans, gives them health care, feeds all these families in Des Moines, Iowa, because they're making nails. Another part of it goes to a watch company. Another part of it goes to a semiconductor company. All of these different industries, all of these different families, all of this wealth is supported because of the efforts of this man. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to assume that he's being stingy because he's not giving some of it to, like, saving the Icelandic snow owls or something.
Yeah, so, hey, we've got a little dispute going on. I like it. There's a little fire in the disco tonight. Hell yeah.
I like it.
Exactly. Melody agrees with me. Melody, I'm glad you've got my back. Melody's a writer. The power of the pen is greater than anything. But Yolanda just smacked me down a little bit. I might just have to cry. That's okay. I'll cry quickly, wipe my tears, and then get up again. So, first of all, I have to address that classism point. It might be classism. Yeah. You know, when I was in law school, the Wall Street Journal, I want to say, a student group sponsored a symposium on the oppression of the wealthy in our society. There wasn't a lot of attendance because when people talk about the oppression of those who are benefiting from the upper echelons of society, that's like saying, you know, screw the people living on the streets of London. We want to make sure that the Queen of England doesn't feel oppressed. The Queen of England can survive people looking down on her because she's the queen. Those other people can't. So I don't want to act as though there is a level playing field. Okay, yeah, maybe I'm making assessment, and I'm sure would have more than enough money to buy it off me. Haven't paid me enough money, and I will completely switch my point of view. That being said, yes, he's done all these things and we should be thankful for, but we shouldn't also, I believe, look at what he's done as the maximum of what he is capable of. If he's hoarding $500 million, well, maybe it doesn't even need to go to charity. I've got problems with charity, having worked for one. We'll go off on that another day. But perhaps he could be spreading his wealth by doing a whole other thing, starting a zillion other companies that are benefiting, or doing R&D that are for futuristic companies that are making benefits, so that he's merely living on 4 or 5 million a year as opposed to 700 million. He has capacity to do more. When we are given the ability, the capacity to do more, when we've been given the gift of intellect, of passion, of drive, of work ethic, all of these sorts of things, the universe, providence gave it to us for a reason. And if we simply say it's so I can benefit and give to things when I feel like it's convenient, and I should reap all of this above and beyond the benefit that I'm already giving because I'm still personally sitting on tons and tons and tons of I don't even need, that's an ethical problem.
Oh, I have something to say about that. So
Okay,
hold on, Brian.
please.
Hold on, Brian.
Okay.
So I look at it from this point of view, right? What if this person, David, comes from a poor class?
So
Comes, well, hold on, wait.
okay.
Comes from comes from a poor class, and he built this steel company, and now he's wealthy, right? But let's just say his whole contribution for his charity is turning around his town so that now his entire town does not have to start how he started. Now, is that changing America or the world on a grand scale? No, but also too is giving other people a chance to at least to have a better life than he did, because his town is so near dear to his heart, and he wants to help the people around there by giving them better school systems, or helping them get better school systems, better groceries to eat, better businesses. So now this community is not a community of survival, because when you have a survival mentality, morality is out the door. So now he builds this company, comes back, builds this little town, and now he's satisfied. Even though he has billions and millions of dollars, he's just changed the entire trajectory of a town by putting the actual resources there. Now, also too, like you said, if he has multi-millions of dollars to start other businesses, if those businesses work, then it gives him, he may be ascend to a trillionaire. Right? Because if he's investing in businesses, that means those businesses can be productive, which is going to, in turn, if he owns them, going to give him more money. But then also, too, if everyone here knows, building a business is extremely hard, even when you have even when you have capital, right? So he may say, I've done this, and it's still, I'm willing to put my eggs in some of these baskets, but I don't want to. Like, he may try to either change the whole trajectory of the dynamic of a town, or maybe his own family. Maybe he's been coming from a family of just people being poor, and maybe he's hoarding all that money if he has a family, to teach them how to continue the legacy of the Bird family, so that they changes the entire trajectory of their family line, as opposed to emptying out into the people. Because also too, when you do that, now if you're doing it to help people so people can function on their own, that's great. But then when you give people fish as opposed to not teaching them how to fish, then they become lazy. And the moment you not feed them no more, then they become unappreciative and forget everything that you've done for them. And then now they're dependent on something. So that's just my 2 cents about that.
I'm just going to say one thing, and if this leads to a separate point and you wanted to go back to another point, I'm fine with that. But I don't believe there's such a thing as hoarding money. I think that is a myth. I mean, we work in money, Chris. There is no such thing as hoarding money. Even if you're hoarding it, unless, of course, you are hoarding it in gold bars in your basement somewhere, okay? Or in a mattress. And if you got billions, that's a lot of gold, that's a lot of cash, that's a huge mattress, right? Even if it's in a bank, that is technically not hoarding money, because that bank takes that money and creates mortgages out of it.
Sure.
They lend it out to small businesses. They usually don't leave it in a bank, for that matter.
They don't leave it in the bank.
most extraordinarily wealthy people do, as you said, Scott. They either create other business interests or invest in other business interests. So this concept of them hoarding it selfishly, I don't think is actually accurate. I think that most of the people reinvest their money, and they'll gain from it, to Chris's point, but they reinvest it into R&D, into companies that are creating new technologies because they want to hit big. It's not like they're doing it because they're like, pious in any way, but it still has a positive impact.
Which then they'll be trillionaires, and then it's like, why does he have $1
It
trillion?
doesn't even matter. Yeah, I wish he was doing more with it. Sure, I'll invest it in this tech startup, and then it does good. And you go, that's not fair. He did good, and then it just perpetuates itself.
One of the beauties. Oh, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, I think one thing that comes to my mind is impact can be viewed differently depending on the lens that you're at. So I think in the three of us, and I don't want to speak for anyone's financial situation on this call, but I can only assume that none of us are billionaires just yet, if that's any of our intentions. But
or do you know?
Or do I really know? I'm being serious. So, and I think what that does is it puts me closer to the day-to-day hardship. And that's where I think sometimes I find myself trying to judge someone else's status, someone else's position in life, because I'm that much closer to the hardship than someone like Jeff Bezos, who has greater distance to the day-to-day hardships that I experience. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing, and Brian, you hit the nail on the head, and that's who am I to determine that this is the impact or these are the things that the person has to do with his $1 million? Who am I to determine that Jeff Bezos is the one that has to do X, Y, and Z with $1 billion? When the reality of the matter is there could be so many decisions made behind closed doors that I may never know anything about. I mean, think about like how many decisions are made in how, this is a slight digression, but how many decisions are made behind closed doors by governments that determine the futures of countries that we have no clue what was said, how it was said, and when it was said. So I think the same thing can apply to money. How many of those behind the doors situations happen where Bezos, Buffett, Gates, Zuckerberg, whoever else chooses to meet there and say, hey, this is where we're going to invest our money. And it's not going to trickle down to someone like myself where I can see the logical pattern that, oh, it was the four of them that made this happen. I forgot the guy's name. What's his name? David?
David Bird.
Who do I have to thank for this? Okay.
David Bird.
Okay. I knew nothing about this man until tonight. Now he's going to be like, I'm just
You've got a hit out on me. I'm blaming you for that.
But you know what I mean? I think that there is a fine line between what I'm able to see through my lens, but that's solely because I'm that much closer to the daily struggle that many people experience compared to someone who is in a completely different landscape, or almost you could say completely different world, that to them their struggles are drastically different than mine. So that's where I think for me, I really try and understand that my version of what it means to have an impact on the world can be drastically different than someone else's version
but
of
I've
what
got
it means to have that.
I've got to say something about this. First of all, I want to acknowledge Yolanda's remark, which is that it's his prerogative, and that was going earlier as to what this hypothetical billionaire we're talking about would spend his money on. That is, I think that's an interesting point, and I wish we had more time because I would like to talk about some ethical ins and outs of that point. But Yolanda, thank you so much for bringing that into the conversation because it's actually a very serious and significant point to be raising. And then Melody jokes about Jeff Bezos's money being helped, for space flights. And that itself, again, goes as to some deeper questions. The one thing that I will say about this, though, is that as much as we may want to say, let's not judge the problems of the mega rich, let's not judge their activities or their actions, living a life that's infused with ethics, in which ethics is a goal, does put us into a position where, to some extent, we have to be able to have discernment as to how we're assessing outcomes. And some people may judge that as, or may accuse that of being judgmental, but if we're not able to make decisions about lives, if we're not able to say this is a more ethical outcome or not, then we are not, if we're going to do that, we then are going to be in a position where we are inherently judging. Starting at the extreme, I think that it is wrong to commit genocide, then yes, we're going to judge Adolf Hitler. Sorry, not every choice that's out there has neutral moral value under any ethical system. And then the other thing that I would make a point about with regards to this is, while we may say, and Oleg, this is kind of going to you. You and I haven't had a fight lately, so let's just have one. Why we might say that they're living in a different world, and so who are we to even begin to assess what they're feeling? Let's make one thing very clear. All of their decisions, all of the pressures that they have, all of the things that they are enduring as members of the most financially elite in the world surely can't be that awful, because bluntly, I don't see any of them giving up all of that money so they can join the ranks of the homeless. I've worked with the homeless. I actually don't recall seeing a lot of billionaires walking through the doors of the shelter. So embedded in the status decisions that they've made and the trajectories, their situation in life and the troubles and the toils that they go through are not quite the same as those in different class strata. I have heard poor people say they want to be billionaires. I would be very curious to hear interviews with anyone who is highly wealthy and said that they would love to have their social status decreased and then actually deliberately done that.
I mean, would anybody want that though, Scott? I mean,
I don't think anybody would want that though.
Well, but then let's think about what the implications of that is for what we have to say. We can't sit up and say, I believe, that if they're somehow, when it comes to their decision making or their life situation or all this sort of stuff, the subject to some negative vicissitudes in the circumstances that they are in, or there is some negativity attached to judgment of them, because all of them have the choice to leave those behind in a way that the poor don't.
Yeah, but if I have money and if I say, okay, I may not want to be homeless, but I can give my money to Habitat for Humanity to build homeless shelters. I can do that too, though, right?
Yes, but how many people really give up their wealth to do that?
No, but I don't have to give them my wealth in order to do that.
And I'm not saying they have to.
I
think that the point Brian made earlier is a very fair one, which is that putting money in a bank allows and by the way, I'm a very significant capitalist, or at least I'm capitalistic in my orientation, because I do believe that a society that has greater prosperity and greater wealth is one that we want to be in, and the flow of cash and the flow of investment within a macro economy is necessary for people to live lives that minimize poverty and suffering and all these sorts of things. So I actually am glad you raised that point. People don't think about money in banks as not being hoards, but actually an investment in the larger good of our society, because it allows banks to have money flow throughout it. Thank you very much for that, Brian. I hadn't really thought about that. But let's be clear, what decisions people make and the capacity to make those decisions, I don't think should be treated as necessarily equivalent, because they're not. And so am I really going to feel like there's suffering involved in classism? What I probably would agree with you, Brian, is classism against the very wealthy. Yes, but is it? It's sort of like, am I going to really sit and suffer if someone says am I really going to be that guy that sits around and says, don't hate me because I'm beautiful? That's lookism.
You could, right? So like if there was, well, I don't necessarily know if I want to draw this parallel, but if there was a person that, like, while I was eating donuts and drinking beer, instead was waking up early in the morning, eating lentils and going on 6-mile jogs and exercising, and through their diligence has a fantastic body, and I am pudgy, and then I get angry at them when I look at the decisions that their life led to, and then I compare it to the decisions my life led to, and then I speak disparagingly of them, I view that more as me being like bitter perhaps, than it really is like there's any moral justification to it beyond that. So when I look at the decisions of the extraordinarily wealthy, and I say, well, I'm not that way, and if I were that way, I bet you anything that I would probably do something different. It makes me feel like I'm thinking way too highly of myself, and perhaps being classist in a way. I used to feel that way, Scott, but when I let go of that idea that there's something potentially morally corrupting about wealth, I found that I was getting wealthier, because I think it's going to be very difficult to grow your wealth while simultaneously feeling that there's a negative aspect to it.
Well, I do want to be clear about this. Thank you. I actually don't believe half the stuff I say on this show.
Oh boy.
You're one of these devil's advocates.
What?
Guys. Just for the sake of
Like-
stirring up trouble.
Bam! But I will say one thing that I believe: when I have my
I don't even know what to
billions,
say to
and I
that.
will feel guiltless about it. So I'll let you decide what you believe today. But this is something I really do believe: that one thing that all of us can do once we, get our first few billion, give them to our sponsor. Why don't you, Oleg, tell folks a little bit about our sponsor?
So this is someone you and I connected with, or I might have been connected through you to Patrick
and he
Bartlett.
was a guest on this show.
He was a guest on this podcast however many weeks ago by now, and he is someone who has believed in both of us, as well as I think many other people that have been a part of this. And his company is called Spectrum Designs Foundation. It's near where you live, Scott Mason, is that right?
It is.
Somewhat
It is
near?
in the New York City area, Port
Yeah.
Washington, Long Island.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it primarily focuses on employing those who have disabilities.
Yep, are on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, and then I know one of the things they produce are T-shirts, and we'll play the animation briefly. But I wanted to ask this quick question before we go this, and I hope this doesn't open up a can of worms that we're going to be talking about for the next additional hour. But I'm really curious about this.
No, I have to go in a minute.
when we're talking when there are comparisons being made to those who have made wealth, such as Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg, Buffett, Gates, whoever it is, I'm really curious to why does it seem like that's where the lens is, and the lens is not necessarily on those who have gone from homeless to similar wealth. What makes that journey different? What makes the I can't really think of any concrete example. Kevin Hart. What makes Tiffany Haddish? What makes people like that who have gone from, living in cars, living on streets, to some level of wealth? What leaves them out of these conversations? And what keeps the others in the ballgame, so to speak? What keeps the Jeff Bezos name so alive, besides being one of the richest people in the world? But what keeps them in the dialogue, regardless of who you speak with? But it leaves some of these other individuals who might make similar wealth, but they have had drastically different circumstances from where they came up to where they are now.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to get to Spectrum, because I think that one of the things I would argue is that it's a different arc and a different situation. If one of the folks, for instance, that is on the autistic spectrum who is working at Spectrum Designs were to suddenly become a billionaire, I probably would admire their journey and view what they did differently than, for instance, Prince Charles, who got it simply by being a child of a queen. Right, what you've done to get your wealth to me is different than just accident of birth suddenly entitling you to rule an entire country and live in a palace.
I think the United States is a nation that gets excited by home runs more than they appreciate line drives, even though both can get you in a game. That's what I think. I think if you're if you come from a middle class family in suburbia, and you went to a private school, and you make a app that makes billions, society's not going to applaud you as much as if you were living in a car and made billions, because we like that home run. If it's just a line drive and the guy had a kind of comfortable life and then made billions, it's like nothing too showy about that. So I think it's just kind of the story of it is what's so appealing.
Yeah.
I want to see some animation.
I love
Wow.
that. I love that a lot because my nephew Chaz, shout out to Chaz, is autistic.
Mm,
He's autistic. We used to do before COVID do the autism speaks walks every year down in New York City.
mhm.
Well, let's talk a little bit. Speaking of shout outs, how can people find you all, Chris and
Mhm.
Brian?
Oh, fantastic. So well, Brian and I, we have the world's leading success fundamentals platform uh on all podcast platforms. You just type in success fundamentals and you can see us. And you can actually follow our content as well as at Success Fundamentals Podcast on IG and pretty much on every social platform. And also, too, if you want to follow me personally, it's at Christopher Kristopher .Sykes.
Mm.
We also have a
Brian, what about
website.
you?
So you can also find us on our website, successfundamentals.com. We got the .com address, Chris.
Mm.
That was tough, but we got it.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
100%.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us on. This was a lot of fun. Does it normally go into debate, Scott, or is everybody always?
Scott, I'm gonna have to let you answer that question.
I was going to turn it over to you. We
Oh,
always have a good time and we're not afraid of a good fight. That's a sign. That's how we show we love each other.
yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Oh, like, how can we find out more about you and what you're doing? And talk to us about some things going on in the next few weeks in your life.
Yeah, so I host another podcast called Overcoming Odds, which is about featuring people who have faced extreme life circumstances or difficult adversities. And so that's one of the spaces that I facilitate. And speaking of personal adversities, I am actually traveling through the world right now, just spending some time in Portugal right now. So I've learned a lot what it means to go on my own and completely step out into this, what I once upon a time perceived world was a scary place, and it's really not that scary. And so it's been beautiful. It's been beautiful to experience, and I know that for me, through my own life and through many of the stories shared through this platform of Overcoming Odds, I've been able to find my own sense of purpose and identity and different ways to reframe challenges. And Mr. Mason, I know you deal with purpose quite a bit, so you might be able to shed additional insights to that.
Find out more about me at purposehighway.com.
Mm.
Boom.
Everyone, it's been a great show. See y'all next Thursday.